Welcome to the Youthlete Academy podcast, empowering kids to have a lifelong love of physical activity and sport by equipping parents to support their journey. So, welcome to a discussion on youth sports and development. Martin and I known each other for a while now, and it's funny how our conversations 10, 15 years ago might not have even had any of these topics, but you and I have definitely gone back and forth. So we just wanted to get some thoughts off of our mind and have an informal discussion on how we see youth sports and development. And for those of you that don't know myself or Martin, just a brief introduction for both of us. So my name's Greg Hetherington. I'm the owner and founder of a gym called Fuel Training Club and have now started a youth sports development called Youthlete Academy. It's been a passion of mine. Especially now I've got kids that are almost 9 and almost 7. So I'm in the thick of coaching, seeing the developments and the different phases and a lot of things that I had learned about, but now I'm experienced firsthand. So, my background, and I feel like this is where Martin and I are very similar. So we have a unique background where we both played an elite sport. We have a fitness education, and then we both are in the fitness industry, owning our own businesses. And I think it provides a unique perspective on the development because we can look back at our experiences as youth. We can reflect on the youth that we're currently coaching and from an elite level, seeing that applied. So for me, it was a degree in kinesiology from McGill University, where I played football, was then drafted into the CFL, played for 3 years, got into the fitness industry, and now have started a fitness business. It's been 12 years now for Fuel Training Club, and Youthlete Academy is just getting going. So Martin, why don't I pass this over to you?
Sweet. Thanks, Greg. Super honored to be here. Great that years later we're having this conversation and bringing it back to kids. My name is Martin Reeder, currently on Vancouver Island. I'm a 2012 beach volleyball Olympian, so represented Canada there. Played for Team Canada for 9 years on our national beach volleyball team. Retired from that and went into fitness. I went through UBC and did an HKIN degree, so went back to that and then built a business in Toronto around athletic movement and life athlete principles, which I love is in your terminology, Greg, which is fantastic. Trying to lead adults in more of an athletic-based physical development versus fitness. So really tried staying the course in athletic development. Did that for about 5-6 years, moved out of that space and then moved down to Australia where I had an opportunity to lead a state organization, volleyball actually, and I was the head of pathways. That turned into the performance director for 5 years and worked with over 1,000 athletes, changed the course of that organization's philosophies on athlete development. And we can dive into that and had all kinds of touch points with parents and young athletes and learned all kinds of lessons working with coaches and sports administrators and other state organizations and national organizations. I wound up leaving that and moving back to Canada, where I built what I would say is the culmination of 20 years of life experience in both professional sport, as a coach, as an athlete, as a administrator, as a director, and blending it into a hometown feel where I get to work with young athletes and support them being better humans through the vessel of sport. So it's called Next Gen Champions. I work with 60 athletes at present in a gym that I built on my family's property. And I also run a beach volleyball summer program where I work with between 40 to 60 athletes locally, which is growing pretty quickly. So yeah, probably actively working with about 100, 120 athletes right now.
Sound busy. So busier. To speak to you. You got more on the plate, but I know the feeling. So I think you touched on a couple of points there, and what you and I have discussed is this crossroads in youth sports and the development of youth moving forwards. And we've discussed this because we've seen it, and I think the basis of this is what's different now in youth athletics and youth development from when it was when we were growing up, it's 90s kids or 80s babies, but playing sports in the 90s. And yeah, if you were to high level, what do you think is the biggest difference right now with kids these days?
Well, I'd say speaking from my own life experience, from what I've observed, obviously when I was young, that was my experience in a small town, to now being more in a small town, but having access to a much greater picture. The pressures and the intensities are earlier and stronger than they were when I was a young athlete. I am 6'7", coordinated. I was able to get by based off of just having raw natural talent, and that matured into being a national, international caliber athlete. I was a late bloomer. It took me some time. I wasn't great until I hit my first year of college. So it took me time to grow and develop. Whereas now, and also during the national team years, how to organize myself, how to be what I call a sovereign athlete. Beach volleyball is a very self-management based sport where I had to book my own flights and book my own trips and create my own training camps. It took me a long time to learn how to do those things. Whereas now we're looking at, representative teams at 11, 12, 13, where you need to show up and have an understanding of who you are and what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. You need to have all kinds of different repetitions off the court, on the court. You need to understand the game in a way that before you could get by on raw talent, now it's not good enough. And so you need to calibrate, from my observations, like a professional athlete when you're 13, 14, 15, because those earlier years are so much more important. I'm not too sure if you have the same experience, Greg, but you got to calibrate way more at a young age. And it's tough because you don't necessarily have the systems physically or mentally or emotionally to handle that type of pressure. And there's all kinds of things that could happen.
Yeah, right. I want to pin that and come back to it about just having to be better prepared for competitive sports now than we would have when we were younger. But you also touched on something that I can resonate with is I was an unstructured athlete, so to speak. I didn't start playing organized sports until I was 9. My dad's a musician. And when I excelled in phys ed at early ages, I didn't get any congratulations really for that. It was, where's your math? Where's your English? But, it was something that I firmly enjoyed, but I look back at it and that's what it is. I was an all-star phys ed kid. You know what I mean? There wasn't one sport that I didn't like playing. I liked playing all of them. But I didn't play anything structured until I was 9. And then, baseball, hockey, basketball, volleyball, soccer, they came either through school or outside of school. And for me as well, I think a big part of it was our street that I grew up on had tons of kids.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was necessary. When I look back at it, I'm like, oh, it was a quiet street, but I don't think it's any quieter than some of the streets are now. But we just played ball hockey and, skateboarded, rollerbladed, played basketball, made up like hide and go seek in behind people's houses. And that was just, you got home from school and that's what you did. And I look back at it because I've tried to dissect where I developed as an athlete. And I look at all the positive experiences I had with physical activity. I never really thought of it as youth athletic development. I just thought of it as playtime.
Yeah.
And really I didn't, I ended up playing football, but I didn't play any football until I got into high school. And it wasn't really until my last year of high school where football became the primary sport. And actually, to be honest, it wasn't the primary sport. Baseball was. It just happened to be the one sport that gave me an opportunity to go to the next level. So, I look back and as you said, had I not, coming back to that pin, had I not started to develop at a younger age, would I have had that opportunity? And, I'm not sure. So this crossroads is sort of, as you alluded to with parents, is how do you give them a head up on other kids, if that's the way you look at it, or at least a head up on getting an opportunity, not letting the doors close early. If you're saying that, and I agree that if you don't start by a certain time, then those doors close. Obviously different sports, but it require, for instance, gymnastics right now, you're young, especially for girls, you've got to peak earlier than you would, let's say, for baseball. Because of when the elite level of competition begins. Mm-hmm. So for you, when you think of the crossroads, what do we have to do now from a development standpoint as a kid if they want to play a competitive sport at a high level?
It's such a great conversation. So I'll put my performance director hat on and also my current business hat on. So when I was a part of selecting state teams and building structures for U14 all the way up to U23, you always have to leave space for physical specimens, right? You and I both know someone shows up and they got this incredible physical template, but they don't quite have the skill. You're going to make space for them because you can't teach height. So that but you can't build a system around the physical anomaly. So there's the late entry athlete I love, but generally speaking, that is going to be more of an anomaly or an athlete that has the physical characteristics, volleyball, height, right? That's something there, or speed or hand-eye, whatever it looks like, where the coach is like, holy smokes, but you can't build a system around that. You got the early adopters and the people who specialize early. They often are, I don't want to say dumpster fires, but they got a lot of problems because they specialize early. And so their movement is so specific to that sport that they come in at 17, 18, 19, injuries, they're riddled with all kinds of stuff. They're really siloed in the way that they think. And then we look at, okay, well, kind of later specialization, playing multiple sports, having the benefits of creative thinking, playing with different numbers of teammates, different fields, different balls, different surfaces, rotations, whatever that may look like. I tend to lean in that direction, that kind of early exposure, later specialization, multi-sport. I love that. Is that the right way? I don't know. I just like it. And I in time, hopefully we'll be able to not prove it, but be able to support that with more evidence. So no matter what happens, if you're able to move really well and express yourself physically, you're going to create opportunities for yourself. And so, yes, the specific skill stuff is there, but at the end of the day, if you can be a great mover and express yourself in whatever qualities that sport requires, be it speed, strength, hand-eye coordination, reactiveness, whatever that may be, the more solutions you can solve physically and faster, the better placed you're going to be. Is that a right or wrong? I'm not too sure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's and I think this falls in line with and if you've heard of the long-term athlete development model, and there's the Canadian version, the American version. There's a number of them. They're sort of, they have some differences, but more or less they overlap more so than they diverge. And yeah, that broad skill development. And again, I look back at my experience as a kid. I was exposed to so many different sports and activities that you start to develop these skill sets that you're not necessarily a master of one, you're a jack of all trades. And then when you have the opportunity to specialize, you've already reached those corners of skill development. Now you just pull from them and you begin to improve on those. Obviously there's exceptions to every rule here. And I mean, we should exclude golf and some of the high repetition type movements that you just need to do a lot at a young age. But if we talk, USA hockey doesn't encourage early specialization until 14 years old. And the early specialization, I think, is important to define as well. It's year-round participation. And this brings to another point. Some kids, like myself, I thrived in a broad sport development, being able to do a lot of different sport camps and going to camps and trying different things. But I know some kids, and especially looking at it now, friends of mine whose kids just love hockey. That's all they want to do. And I think that there might be an exception there too, because if a kid really likes doing something, and as long as they're getting exposed to some of these other skill sets at school or camps, then I'm less concerned, and this is hypothetically, on burnout. But I think the signs you need for a kid that's doing that early, you've got to look out for those signs of burnout, because I think a lot of us have know someone who peaked early. They were an elite 13-year-old in a sport that doesn't get you paid until you're in your 20s, right? And I think that's an important aspect of it. And what you had mentioned before about the long term, becoming an adult. And I see development for kids now, I can say this in hindsight, is that if you're going to develop as an elite athlete, or you just want to be healthy, you actually follow the same development path initially, right? It diverges when you get into your sports specialization at whichever sport, whichever age that is, but then they converge again later in life. So inevitably when elite sports ends, you're back and you've seen it. I see it a lot. A lot of athletes, they didn't enjoy the physical activity aspect of it. They enjoyed the competition. They enjoyed the camaraderie. So when that's over, they don't have this positive association with working out and the work that got them, to these levels. And you see a lot of these athletes fall off, both physically and emotionally. But, I see, that development at a young age and early specialization, as you said, it's yet, there's not one formula that works, right? It's anecdotal. You take these longitudinal studies, which are effectively us looking at the athletes we're currently training. And in 10, 15 years from now, we'll be able to say in hindsight, this worked. And, hopefully more of that data comes out to suggest that. But I think it is highly individualized on, the individual, but the kid that you're working on. The sport contributes to that too. But I think for parents, thinking about, I think every parent has the best intentions for their kid. They want them to succeed, right? So for you, you're speaking, because obviously, kids aren't fronting the bill for some of these sessions, the sports that they play. So the parents are making the decision. How do you look at the parents' involvement? What's the best opportunity for parents to make sure that, one, kids have the best opportunities, no doors are shut, but two, we're not risking, early burnout?
It's very difficult for me to give advice because everything is nuanced in context, small city, big city, the amount of sports that they're playing, what sport they're playing, all kinds of different things. But maybe if we were to talk about or jam on some principles, I think that would be really helpful. And right at the beginning, like the child needs to lead it. Now, they can't lead it 100%. They're still children, but something that I've spoken to parents about is like, you can't be the majority stakeholder. Like the kid needs to be 51% owner of this. And so if you just simply meet their excitement, meet their energy to it, and support them in that, there'll be a lot of learning there. And so then you at least avoid the conversation where the child's living through the eyes of the parent, or the parent's trying to create opportunities for the child. They don't want to be there. And then unfortunately, it's a counterproductive conversation. The second one is listen to your kid, listen and support them in the direction that they want to go. And if someone is intrinsically motivated to do the thing, it's going to be way better than if you have to intrinsically motivate them. Now, there's some support there. For instance, I work with young athletes. They show up at my doorstep at 6 a.m. So some of the parents need to support their kids in getting up in the morning and showing up at the door. But talking with one of the women this morning, one of the mothers, she was so grateful and said, look, you're the only thing that my son gets up early for and is excited to do. Like, that says something, right? That
the most important.
So that's one. Bit of a conflict of interest because this is a part of one of my personal philosophies, but like I'm stepping in to a really sacred role in the community as a positive male leader. Like, I own that. I want that responsibility. So I present myself, getting emotional here, but I present myself as like a safe place where I challenge them. I'm outside the family unit, but I have the trust of the family. So you as a parent, it's really important, I think, to have people like me, like you, who you trust with your child. And if you don't trust that person, or if you don't have that relationship, well, either develop it or find another place. Because your child's spending 2 or 3 training sessions a week with me, I'm building them up or I'm breaking them down. And something I said, I had a talk 2 weeks ago with our entire school district of teachers. It's like, if you're leading an environment, you have to be very careful with what you say, because there are people that hold on to a single sentence for the rest of their life. Are you telling them they can, or are you telling them that they can't? So whoever's leading the environment, I think, is really important. And as a parent, to be involved in the choice or to do some homework, invest in a relationship, it's critical. And so those are probably 3 things that come to mind that, like, we're still not even talking about athletic development here. We're talking about people, right?
Yeah, but and I think that's where it's important, and a lot of people don't realize that emotional commitment and development is part of it. And And I think what you said, about being a role model, and it's probably been the most rewarding part about me coaching the past couple of years, because you've gotten into it. There's an age where it's less about, daycare. And now, as you said, you're taking on that role model responsibility. And every parent knows that kids listen to other adults better than the parent, right? Like they know the authority figures. And I think that's an important part. So for instance, our hockey team, I coach the 8-year-olds, 4 dads. So we're 4 dads. And we're like, hey, can you talk to my son about this? Can you talk? So, because we know they're not going to listen to us. But it's such an important part. And I own that. I want that responsibility too. And I find it extremely rewarding. And I know in the community, there's a lot of people there who step up, who help out, fill voids that otherwise wouldn't be filled. And I feel like it would be, a disservice to my community to sit on the sidelines and not be able to contribute and help out, whether it's school or sports outside of the school. But you'd mentioned, that the commitment of the kids coming to see you at 6 a.m. and there's that fine line of letting the kid lead, right? And teaching commitment, because that's the give or take. It's sort of like if you left a 9-year-old to choose what food they're going to eat, right? You can't let them lead there. So there's certain things where you need to recognize, I know what's best for you. You need to do it. And that I think, for me, looking at this, is one of the toughest areas to dissociate. What am I doing as a parent that's helping versus what am I doing that's hurting? And I think that's where a lot of the questions are. Hockey happens to be probably the most organized of sports in Canada at the youth level, the most people entering it. So there's a lot of development there. And I think there's benefits of being associated with that structure. But again, there's also the hazards of being over structured, having, as I mentioned before, the unstructured play. But for parents, finding any sport that your kid likes doing, or just being excited about it. It's the same thing at the Youthlete Academy classes that we're running. Even I've seen in the past 6 months, I've adjusted the programming. It's not that I'm not training 7 to 16-year-olds like they're adults. But at the same time, having that structure of, we're going to do a warm up, then we're going to go into some exercises, is very similar. But what we do as far as making it fun is where I've tweaked things the most. Making it team-based. You're always with, a person on your team, or you partner up. And when we say competition in these workouts, it's not to win or lose. It's, you can explain RPE, rate of perceived exertion, to adults, and intensity. Kids, they don't understand that. But if you say, hey, I just want you to beat this kid to the line, they're going to run, right? They're going to run. And as long as you reinforce that with, look, and even though you say it as much as possible, the kids who win cheer and the kids who lose, you can see they're kind of sulking, but it is an opportunity to then say, look, you guys just all worked really hard. This is, without sounding cheesy, it's like you all won because you're getting fitter and you're enjoying what you're doing. Who didn't have a good time doing that? And I think, as you said, kids leading, it's important, whatever activity that is. So for, as you said, with parents, trusting someone else and getting them involved, I think that's such a huge part of the development. And I mean, I don't want to go off the path here with homeschooling, but it's the same idea where if you are the parent and you are the teacher and you are the coach and you're all this, it's tough for sometimes a kid to get out of that. It's just, you can't really create separate relationships in that regard. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, the drive home, and I've seen a lot on this too, but I think in the number of games that I've driven home with my son, both baseball and hockey, we probably had one conversation about the game, and it's, he'll ask me, hey, what do you think? But often it's sort of like, what are we having for dinner? What's on the schedule tomorrow? They're over it at that point. And I think that's important, is how you cultivate that mindset of, hey, we just had a fun activity at a good time and now we're moving on. Not, here's what you can improve on. Here's what I need you to do. And not to say that that's necessarily bad, but you got to read, the body language of kids to know, is this too much? Or, is this something that they enjoy doing? So when we talk about some more of the opportunities, not just with parents, but where could both emotionally and physically kids be better developed, in that youth range of, say, 7 to 12, almost like before puberty or before a lot of sports specialize? What do you think could be done better?
And is big questions, big societal questions. I mean, I think a lot's changed too. Like school sport used to have a pretty important space. And where I am now, school sport, no one really cares for it. It's not really a great development platform. A lot of responsibility on teachers. So less teachers are stepping up to be coaches in their environment. So there's a lot more pressure on parents. Those parents don't really know how to develop athletes. I'm in a smaller town on Vancouver Island. We have a lot of great, well-meaning parent coaches because their kids play. Or do they know how to develop athletes? No, they don't. Do they do their best to get the most out of their athletes that season? Yes. But what we're talking about is long-term athlete development here. So, not a lot of people are really understanding that. So in an ideal world, looking at early exposure, late specialization, multi-sport sampling, fun environments, the really structured play and practices at a young age, which will probably be more in representative teams. And I'm not throwing representative teams under the bus, because getting athletes to play in a more structured environment and play higher competitive games, travel, learn how to manage themselves on the road, I think is a net positive, as long as it's only for a small period of time, not year round. Do different things. So for instance, I was born and raised on the bottom of Mount Washington. I love snowboarding. It's a free sport in the sense of I don't have a coach. I just go do my thing. It's more artistic, right? So like what are the different medley of sports that you're playing? Are you playing in a group of, so you're playing soccer, so you have 11 people on a field. You're playing volleyball, so you have 6. You're playing beach volleyball with 2. You're swimming, individual, tennis, individual, surfing, snowboarding, cross-country skiing, well, as long as you're not competing, more out there by yourself and managing yourself. So there's the different pieces to different sports to develop the mind and develop the body, rotation-based sports, linear-based sports, sprinting, jumping. So, looking at it holistically in terms of what are the qualities that sport requires, and that being a medley across the year, I think is a really great way to approach it. Is my child getting outside, or are they spending year round in a building under fake light with boots on? Get them outside, get them bare feet, simple things like that. I know I'm not getting philosophical from a sporting perspective, but just keeping it high level, that those are the things that come to my mind, Greg.
Yeah, no, I think there's so many things we can go on off of what you just said there, from barefoot training to teaching running, what the foundational movements should be. All kids should learn regardless of what sports they go in, which we will pin for future topics, because I think those are important. But those are like 30, 45-minute conversations on each on their own. And I think, yeah, what you also we sort of brushed over is burnout. I think it depends on the age of the kid. I don't think there's too many kids before. I'm going to use hockey as an example, because baseball is probably the same as far as when the age which you develop. I'm obviously not as familiar with as volleyball as you are, but if you've got 12-year-olds starting to burn out, and we've spoken about this offline, you're hearing more about it, and often just because you hear more about something doesn't necessarily mean it's happening more. It just could be that you're hearing more about the things that have always happened. But there seems data suggests that there's more kid burnout, there's more kid injuries, all relative to the number of people who are enrolled. So per capita on all fronts, this burnout is being led by something, and as you said, it's nuanced. It might not just be one thing, but the brunt of this conversation goes to early specialization, unstructured or structured play, being forced to do things, or at least being pushed to do things that aren't necessarily favorites. Like what would you say those three, and anything else you think that's leading to burnout for kids?
Something that's interesting that I don't have, my sport doesn't have high level competitions at 12 or 11. Just doesn't happen, right? Volleyball just doesn't have that. So we're more of a late developing sport. Usually club starts around 13, 14. I'd love for kids to play a little bit more in elementary school. So I'll shelf that. Something that I'm exposed to now that I work with hockey athletes and baseball athletes is travel competitions, and the value and the importance of travel competitions. So for instance, I have a cousin who is 12 years old, 11 or 12. He's a pitcher, and he's now played in 5 international tournaments this year. And so
travel teams,
right. So I'm not going to pass judgment because he loves it. So, okay. So that's something, but if we're traveling 5 times internationally, what's the cost to the family and the stress levels as a result of that? A lot of thumbs up here. And for the child, a lot of travel, and what's that doing for them, and kind of isolating them. They're missing out on other things potentially. It's that specialization travel team. I haven't been convinced that it exists to benefit the athlete. The shocking number of baseball, the Junior World Series with the 9 or 10-year-olds, the amount of those kids that make it to the show is like a decimal point. So I don't know what is the intrinsic value of that. They're having fun, great, but do none of them make it because they burn out because they're going so hard too early? And what are the ramifications of a family? That comes to mind when you say kind of what else.
Yeah, the travel teams have gone, a lot of it too. Not to mention the cost, that you're pushing out a large group of society that just isn't able to do it, and they don't get those opportunities. But the other thing you and I discussed was how this unstructured play is moving towards video games, and how we're seeing, these kids who are being forced into doing activities, all these structured activities, are falling back on video games as sort of the unstructured play. The emergence of this I find fascinating, because I do think there are benefits to kids playing video games. I mean, aside from learning technology, the hand-eye coordination, the rapid eye, being able to get reaction type experiences with it. I think there are benefits, and I'm not speaking specifically to professional gaming, but how is this push to structured play now putting kids into doing more electronics?
Yeah, well, in my environments, I'm learning that there are a lot of emotionally unregulated young people, and so they really struggle with failure. So that's something that's really interesting. So when you're in a structured environment, and maybe this is more of a philosophy around how do we set up really great development environments. If it's a free play based environment, you're allowed to fail. And so maybe video games, that failing is a little bit less.
You get to respawn.
Detrimental. You get to reset. So within that environment, but then you get into a real one in a public space, and then potentially a coach who's not interested in seeing failure, or it's a toxic culture where people are laughing at you. So now you're scared to try, or, there's some really interesting parallels to that. But I'll go back to, I'm noticing there's a lot of unregulated kids that don't know how to manage failure.
No.
Can we attribute that to video games? I don't know, but it's a really interesting one around how to be a good team player and how to be a part of a group when you can have your own autonomy in a video game. How does that relate to sport? Who knows?
I guess learning how to fail like that. One of the things that I've tried to curb right from the beginning of every sport that I've coached is the emphasis on winning the game and scoring goals or hitting home runs. And I think it's important that kids need to, get recognition. Hey, good play, good job. That's great. And, we've implemented a hustler of the game, right? Which is, I know I'm blanking on the name of the coach who I took this from, but TNT standing for takes no talent. What are the things that take no talent? Hustling, working hard. So these easy acronyms, especially for kids, they get a kick out of it. And now, AC/DC is our theme song because they associate, the TNT with them hustling and getting an award. But how, creating this mindset that it's okay if you don't win. It's okay if you don't score goals, and I know grandparents and parents, the most, if you're not at the game, you're trying to be supportive. But one of the things that I hear is, oh, how many goals did you get? Did you get an assist? It's often the first thing. And you don't realize that that it's not that it's taking away from what we're providing, but it's, hey, I saw you play a position today that you've worked on, that you've struggled with in the past, and we've provided feedback, and now you've learned how to play it. And that's a win, in this development phase, especially. And seeing kids, I think that's an interesting part about, failure, is learning how to fail, recognizing that it's okay to fail, and not being put on the spot by coaches. I feel like kids, when they fail around their friends, they're playing, I don't know, football in the schoolyard, right? They're not quite they move on to the next play. They're not pointed out. I'm sure there's still the stress of being like, oh no, I dropped the ball and I got to go back into the huddle. But that ability to learn how to fail and recognizing that what success is not always confounded to the rules of the game, winning the game or losing the game and whatnot. And I think that's these life lessons, as I said before, the divergence of your sport and physical activity, but then its convergence later on in life is, these life lessons that you get from sports can shape ultimately the outcome of how you deal with all adversity.
100%.
And from a young age, cultivating that, the team mentality of working together, and it's not about winning or scoring, getting as many home runs, but I think that's such an important part of youth sports, and why I think even if you're not planning on playing competitive sports and at a higher level, just getting exposed to that at a young age can be tough. But yeah, so I think with this, there's so many things that I could chat about on this. It's good starter. Put some pin in some of these other topics that we brought up, but for anyone who's listening, if you've got questions on what Martin and I have discussed, or if there is anything else you wanted that maybe we touched on briefly, but you want us to elaborate on, we can get together and discuss this a little bit more, and maybe talk about something less broadly and more specifically. But I don't know, Martin, anything else you want to add in here?
Look, something that I have brought to my return to sport after leaving was better people make better ... So a focal point to all of this, and when we talk about youth and development and sport at a young age and competing and striving, we're learning, we're teaching, we're supporting youth in discovering how to channel their energy and channel themselves in a positive way. And very few of them are going to be able to do that in a professional capacity to make money later on in life. So there inevitably is a transition away from sport, even for the person who becomes a professional. So it's this incredible spectrum of how do we get the most out of them right now so that they can succeed, but also how are we setting them up to succeed in life as well. And that's really what I bring to my environments. And I love talking about that. And hopefully parents are seeing that sport's just not the here and now. It's also the setup of how, as a healthy part of the young adolescent's upbringing, and learning how to fail as one of the many different topics of conversation. It's great. So I'm not a parent, so I can't speak as a parent yet, but I can absolutely speak on my experience as a coach, performance director, and athlete. So I'm happy to bounce off with you, and you can be the expert father.
Yeah. Cool. Father in training. I feel like you're always a parent in training, and then they're no longer kids anymore, and so you're out of it. You're not back in it. You almost want to have this succession plan for knowledge to go to the next group of parents coming up. But I think, you nailed it. And a good way to finish this is that, of the kids who play sports in high school, fewer than 1% will play at an elite level following high school. But 100% of those kids will become adults. And I think it's important that we look at the importance of creating these positive associations with physical activity, for one, and also being able to learn all these other life lessons through sport, right? Getting repetitions at failing, recognizing, taking feedback, working with others. I mean, you can go on all the benefits to it, but I really do think like the long-term development for kids, you can start them really young, and as we go over some of these points, the importance of developing them without burnout and pushing them into travel teams too early, if at all, are important. But thanks again, Martin. Appreciate the conversation. And for anyone listening, hope to do this again. Let us know what you want to hear.
Amazing.